Father Michael O'Connor was preparing for the evening mass when he heard the strange scratching sound at the heavy oak doors of St. Mary's Cathedral. It was a persistent, desperate noise that seemed to echo through the sacred halls with an urgency that made the elderly priest pause in his preparations. The sound wasn't like the usual visitors who came seeking solace or confession. This was different, primal, and filled with a determination that sent an inexplicable chill down his spine. As he approached the massive doors that had welcomed countless souls over the past century, Father O'Connor had no idea that what he was about to witness would shake his faith to its very core and challenge everything he believed about miracles, divine intervention, and the mysterious ways in which God works in the world. When Father O'Connor slowly pulled open the heavy door, his breath caught in his throat. There, collapsed on the stone steps of the cathedral, was an ancient German shepherd whose body told a story of unimaginable suffering and endurance. The dog's once proud frame was now gaunt and trembling, his ribs clearly visible beneath matted fur that spoke of weeks, perhaps months, of wandering without care. His hind legs appeared to be partially paralyzed, explaining the dragging motion that had created the scratching sounds against the door. But it was the dog's eyes that struck Father O'Connor most profoundly. They held an intelligence and purpose that seemed almost human, as if this creature had traveled here not by accident, but by divine calling. The priest knelt beside the suffering animal, his heart breaking at the sight of such determination in the face of obvious pain and exhaustion. As Father O'Connor gently examined the dog, he noticed that the animal wore no collar, bore no identification, and showed signs of having lived as a stray for an extended period. Yet there was something about this dog that defied explanation, a dignity in his bearing despite his condition, a sense of purpose that suggested this wasn't merely a sick animal seeking shelter, but something far more significant. The dog's breathing was labored but steady, and when their eyes met, Father O'Connor felt an overwhelming sense of recognition, as if he had been waiting his entire life for this moment without knowing it. The autumn evening was growing cold, and the priest knew he had to act quickly to provide warmth and care for this unexpected visitor who had literally dragged himself to the house of God. With great care and surprising strength for a man in his 70s, Father O'Connor lifted the dog and carried him inside the cathedral. The animal didn't struggle or resist, instead seeming to understand that he was finally safe, finally where he needed to be. As they crossed the threshold into the sacred space, Father O'Connor couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was pregnant with significance beyond his understanding. The dog's arrival felt orchestrated by forces greater than chance or coincidence, and the priest found himself whispering a prayer of gratitude for being chosen as the instrument of whatever divine plan was unfolding. He carried the dog to the small office behind the altar, where he kept a couch for counseling sessions and late-night vigils, and gently placed the suffering animal on the soft cushions. The dog immediately seemed to relax in the warm, quiet space, his labored breathing becoming more rhythmic as the stress of his journey began to subside. Father O'Connor brought him water in a small bowl, which the animal drank gratefully but slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. As the priest knelt beside the couch, studying his unexpected guest in the soft lamplight, he began to notice details that would soon change everything he thought he knew about this encounter. The dog's fur, despite its matted and dirty condition, showed patterns that seemed almost intentional, as if someone or something had carefully arranged the dirt and debris that clung to his coat. But Father O'Connor was tired, and the evening mass was approaching, so he decided to examine his visitor more thoroughly after attending to his pastoral duties, never imagining that when he returned, he would discover something that would transform his understanding of faith itself. After completing the evening mass, Father O'Connor returned to his office with renewed energy and a heart full of concern for his four-legged visitor. The small congregation had been understanding when he briefly explained the situation, and several parishioners had offered to help with veterinary costs or temporary care for the stray dog. But as Father O'Connor settled into his chair beside the couch where the dog lay resting, he felt compelled to examine the animal more closely, driven by an intuition he couldn't quite explain. The office was quiet except for the gentle ticking of an antique clock and the dog's steady breathing, creating an atmosphere of sacred stillness that seemed to amplify every small detail and observation. Under the warm glow of his desk lamp, Father O'Connor began to carefully clean away some of the dirt and debris from the dog's matted fur, using a damp cloth and moving with the gentle precision of someone accustomed to caring for others. As he worked, the dog remained perfectly still, his intelligent eyes watching the priest's every movement with what seemed like patient gratitude. But as Father O'Connor cleaned away layers of grime from the dog's side, he began to notice something that made his hands tremble with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. What he had initially assumed was random dirt and matting was beginning to reveal itself as something far more extraordinary and impossible to explain through conventional means. The pattern that emerged as Father O'Connor continued his careful cleaning was not random at all, but appeared to be deliberately formed, as if the very elements of nature had conspired to create something miraculous on this animal's coat. The dirt, debris, and matted fur had arranged themselves in a way that defied natural explanation, forming shapes and symbols that seemed to tell a story written in the language of divine mystery. Father O'Connor's breathing became shallow as he recognized what was taking shape before his eyes. Symbols that he had studied in seminary, patterns that appeared in the most sacred texts of his faith, images that belonged not in the natural world but in the realm of the miraculous and divine. As more of the pattern became visible, Father O'Connor found himself face to face with what appeared to be a perfect representation of the crucifixion scene, complete with intricate details that showed Jesus on the cross, surrounded by figures that could only be Mary, John, and Mary Magdalene. The image was rendered with a precision and artistry that would have been impressive if created by human hands, but the fact that it had somehow formed naturally on the fur of a stray dog made it absolutely impossible to comprehend through rational thought. Every line was perfectly placed, every shadow exactly where it should be, every detail corresponding to the classical depictions of Christ's sacrifice that adorned the walls of cathedrals around the world. But the miraculous image didn't stop there. As Father O'Connor continued his examination with hands that shook with awe and reverence, he discovered that the pattern extended across the dog's entire body, telling the complete story of Christ's passion from the Last Supper through the resurrection. On the dog's chest was depicted the scene of Jesus washing the disciples' feet, rendered with such clarity and detail that individual facial expressions were visible in the natural arrangement of dirt and fur. Along his back, the Stations of the Cross unfolded in perfect chronological order, each scene flowing seamlessly into the next as if painted by the hand of God himself. Father O'Connor had to pause repeatedly to steady his breathing and wipe tears from his eyes as he comprehended the magnitude of what he was witnessing. The most astounding aspect of this divine artwork was not just its presence, but its perfection. Every theological detail was correct, every historical element was accurately represented, and every spiritual symbolism was precisely placed according to centuries of Christian tradition and scholarship. This was not the work of coincidence or the random arrangement of natural elements. This was a message, a sign, a miracle that challenged every assumption about how God communicates with humanity. As Father O'Connor completed his examination of the dog, he realized that he was not just caring for a stray animal, but serving as witness to one of the most profound religious experiences of his lifetime, and possibly one of the most significant miraculous events in modern history. Father O'Connor spent the entire night in his office, unable to sleep as he grappled with the implications of what he had discovered on the dog's fur. He had carefully photographed every detail of the miraculous images, though he knew that no camera could truly capture the profound spiritual impact of witnessing such a phenomenon in person. The dog, whom Father O'Connor had begun to think of as a divine messenger, slept peacefully on the couch, his breathing steady and calm, as if the completion of his sacred mission had brought him the first true rest he had known in months. The priest found himself alternating between intense prayer, careful study of the images, and simple contemplation of this creature who had literally carried the story of Christ's passion written on his very body. As dawn approached, Father O'Connor faced a dilemma that would test every aspect of his faith and his role as a shepherd to his congregation. He knew that word of this miracle would spread quickly once revealed, bringing attention from religious authorities, media outlets, skeptics, and believers from around the world. The quiet sanctuary of St. Mary's Cathedral would be transformed into a place of pilgrimage and controversy, with people arriving to witness the miraculous dog and judge for themselves whether they were seeing the hand of God or an elaborate hoax. Father O'Connor understood that his own credibility, built over decades of faithful service, would be forever linked to this moment and his decision about how to proceed with this extraordinary revelation. The theological implications were equally overwhelming. If this was indeed a genuine miracle, it represented a form of divine communication that had no precedent in Christian history. God had chosen to write the story of salvation not on tablets of stone or through prophetic visions, but on the fur of a suffering animal who had dragged himself to the doors of the church. The symbolism was profound. Just as Christ had suffered for humanity's salvation, this dog had endured tremendous hardship to deliver God's message to those who would receive it. Father O'Connor found himself wondering if this was how the shepherds felt on that first Christmas night, or how the apostles felt when they witnessed Christ's miracles, overwhelmed by the magnitude of divine intervention breaking through into ordinary reality. Throughout the morning, Father O'Connor consulted his theological texts, searching for any precedent or guidance for such an unprecedented situation. He studied accounts of miraculous appearances, divine signs, and supernatural phenomena throughout church history, but found nothing that prepared him for the responsibility of being the sole witness to such an extraordinary event. The dog continued to rest peacefully, occasionally opening his eyes to regard the priest with that same intelligent, purposeful gaze that had first captured Father O'Connor's attention. It was as if the animal understood the gravity of what he had brought to the church and was waiting patiently for the human world to catch up with the divine reality he represented. As the day progressed, Father O'Connor realized that he could not keep this discovery to himself indefinitely. The weight of bearing witness to a miracle came with the responsibility to share that witness with others, even knowing the chaos and controversy that would inevitably follow. He began to prepare for the most difficult sermon of his career, knowing that when he stepped into the pulpit that evening, he would be asking his congregation to believe something that challenged the very boundaries of what most people considered possible. The dog had brought more than just miraculous images to the cathedral. He had brought a test of faith that would separate those who were ready to accept God's mysterious ways from those who would demand rational explanations for the inexplicable. The afternoon brought several visitors to the church, parishioners who had heard about the stray dog and wanted to check on his condition or offer assistance. Father O'Connor carefully managed these interactions, allowing people to see that the dog was being cared for but not yet revealing the miraculous images hidden beneath his still matted fur. Each visitor commented on the animal's unusual demeanor, noting that despite his obvious suffering and exhaustion, there was something almost regal about his bearing, something that suggested he was far more than just another stray seeking shelter. Father O'Connor listened to these observations with growing conviction that others would be able to see what he had seen, that the miracle was not a private revelation meant for him alone, but a message intended for the entire community of faith. That evening, as Father O'Connor stood before his congregation for what he knew would be the most important sermon of his ministry, his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edges of the pulpit. The familiar faces of his parishioners looked up at him with the usual mixture of expectation and respect, but they had no idea that their priest was about to share something that would challenge their faith in ways they had never imagined. The dog remained in the office, resting comfortably after a day of gentle care and regular meals, his miraculous coat still bearing the divine images that had so profoundly affected Father O'Connor. The priest had spent hours in prayer, asking for the wisdom and courage to share this revelation in a way that would honor both the miracle and the faith of his congregation. Father O'Connor began his sermon by speaking about the nature of miracles and God's mysterious ways of communicating with humanity throughout history. He reminded his congregation of the burning bush that spoke to Moses, the star that guided the wise men to Bethlehem, and the countless ways that God had used creation itself to deliver divine messages to those who were ready to receive them. As he spoke, Father O'Connor could see his parishioners leaning forward with interest, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed, though none could have anticipated the magnitude of what their priest was preparing to share with them. When Father O'Connor finally revealed the presence of the miraculous dog and the images that appeared on his fur, the congregation's reaction was immediate and profound. Gasps of amazement mixed with whispers of disbelief as the priest carefully described each scene that had appeared on the animal's coat, from the Last Supper to the resurrection. Some parishioners wept openly as they comprehended the spiritual significance of what had literally walked to their church's doorstep, while others sat in stunned silence, struggling to process the implications of such an extraordinary claim. Father O'Connor could see the range of reactions across his congregation: faith warring with doubt, wonder battling with skepticism, belief confronting the limitations of rational thought. The priest then invited his congregation to witness the miracle for themselves, leading them in small groups to his office where the dog continued to rest peacefully. As each group entered the quiet space and Father O'Connor carefully revealed the images hidden in the dog's matted fur, the reactions were consistent and overwhelming. Even the most skeptical members of the congregation found themselves moved to tears as they witnessed the perfect depiction of Christ's passion story, written in the natural elements that clung to the animal's coat. Children pointed excitedly at the detailed scenes they recognized from Sunday school lessons, while adults struggled to find words adequate to express their amazement at what they were seeing. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, the congregation's eldest member and a woman known for her practical skepticism, was among the most profoundly affected by the revelation. As she knelt beside the couch where the dog lay, her arthritic hands trembling as she traced the air above the miraculous images, she whispered that in all her 87 years, she had never witnessed anything that so clearly demonstrated God's presence in the world. Her emotional response seemed to give permission for others to express their own overwhelming feelings, and soon the office was filled with the sounds of prayer, thanksgiving, and reverent amazement as congregation members took turns witnessing the miracle that had come to their small church. By the end of the evening, word had begun to spread throughout the community about the miraculous dog at St. Mary's Cathedral. Father O'Connor knew that by morning, their quiet church would be flooded with visitors, reporters, religious authorities, and curiosity seekers, all wanting to witness or debunk what many were already calling the most significant religious miracle of the modern era. The dog seemed to understand the attention that was building around him, occasionally opening his eyes to observe the steady stream of visitors, but maintaining the same peaceful, patient demeanor that had characterized his presence from the moment he arrived at the church doors. As Father O'Connor prepared for the challenges that would come with increased scrutiny and attention, he reflected on how this miraculous visitor had already transformed his congregation's faith experience. People who had attended church out of habit or social obligation were now speaking with passionate conviction about God's active presence in their lives. Families who had been struggling with doubt or spiritual distance were finding themselves drawn together in shared wonder at what they had witnessed. The dog had brought more than miraculous images to their church. He had brought renewal, revival, and a tangible reminder that God's love and power extend far beyond human understanding or expectations. Within 48 hours of Father O'Connor's revelation, St. Mary's Cathedral had become the center of international attention, with news crews, religious scholars, and pilgrims from around the world descending upon the small community to witness the miraculous dog for themselves. The Vatican had dispatched a team of investigators to examine the phenomenon, while scientists, veterinarians, and skeptics arrived determined to debunk what they assumed must be an elaborate hoax. Through it all, the dog remained calm and patient, allowing countless examinations while maintaining the dignified bearing that had first impressed Father O'Connor. Every test, every analysis, every attempt to explain the miraculous images through natural or artificial means only served to confirm what the faithful already knew. They were witnessing something that transcended human understanding or capability. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a leading veterinary forensics expert brought in to examine the dog, announced after 3 days of intensive study that the images on the animal's fur were indeed formed by natural dirt, debris, and matting, but arranged in patterns that defied every known law of probability and natural occurrence. Her report stated that the precision and theological accuracy of the images would have required not only artistic skill of the highest caliber, but also intimate knowledge of Christian iconography and biblical history that no animal could possibly possess. The microscopic analysis revealed that each particle of dirt and every strand of matted fur had been positioned with mathematical precision to create the overall image, as if guided by an intelligence far beyond anything found in the natural world. Religious authorities who arrived expecting to quickly dismiss the phenomenon as fraud or delusion found themselves overwhelmed by the undeniable evidence of divine intervention. Cardinal Alessandro Toretti, the Vatican's leading expert on miraculous phenomena, spent hours examining the dog and consulting with the team of scientists and theologians who had gathered at St. Mary's Cathedral. His preliminary report to Rome stated that while the Church would require extensive investigation before making any official pronouncement, the evidence strongly suggested that they were witnessing a genuine miracle that would have profound implications for understanding how God communicates with humanity in the modern age. As weeks passed and the investigations continued, the dog's condition began to improve dramatically under the careful medical attention he was receiving. His partial paralysis gradually resolved, his strength returned, and his coat began to shine with health and vitality. But as his physical condition improved, the miraculous images that had appeared on his fur began to fade, as if their divine purpose had been fulfilled and they were no longer needed. This development only served to reinforce the belief among the faithful that they had witnessed something truly supernatural, while providing skeptics with new ammunition for their arguments that the entire event had been staged. Father O'Connor, however, understood that the fading of the images was not a sign that the miracle had been false, but rather evidence that it had been perfectly timed and executed according to divine will. The dog had arrived bearing God's message at exactly the moment when the congregation and the wider world needed to be reminded of the reality of divine love and intervention. The images had remained visible long enough for thousands of people to witness them and for extensive documentation to be completed, but they had begun to disappear as the dog's earthly mission neared its completion, just as other miraculous signs throughout history had appeared and vanished according to God's perfect timing. The transformation that occurred in the lives of those who witnessed the miraculous dog extended far beyond the initial amazement and wonder of the experience. Father O'Connor's congregation had grown tenfold, with new members joining not out of curiosity about the miracle, but because their encounter with the divine had ignited a genuine hunger for spiritual growth and community. Marriages were healed, addictions were overcome, and long-standing feuds were resolved as people found themselves unable to maintain petty grievances after witnessing such a profound demonstration of God's love and power. The dog had brought healing that extended far beyond his own physical recovery. As the dog's health fully returned and the last traces of the miraculous images faded from his coat, Father O'Connor faced the question of what would happen to this extraordinary animal who had literally carried divine revelation to their doorstep. The answer came naturally and beautifully. The dog, now officially named Miracle by the congregation, chose to remain at St. Mary's Cathedral as a permanent resident and reminder of God's mysterious ways. Every morning, Miracle could be found lying peacefully beside the altar during services, his presence serving as a living testament to the reality of divine intervention and the truth that God's love extends to all creation. Visitors from around the world continued to come to St. Mary's, drawn not just by the story of the miraculous images, but by the profound sense of peace and spiritual presence that seemed to emanate from both the dog and the transformed congregation that had been chosen to witness one of the most extraordinary religious events of modern times. The legacy of the old dog who dragged himself to the church door extended far beyond the immediate miracle of the images on his fur, touching lives and strengthening faith in ways that would continue for generations to come, proving that sometimes the most profound messages from heaven arrive not through visions or voices, but through the simple, desperate journey of a suffering creature seeking sanctuary at the house of God.